Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you're like me, you're welcoming to the 700 Club. And let me tell you, I'm so tired of hearing about this thing. Do the Democrats want to close ICE down? Do they want to have all these illegals flooding into the country? Do they want to take jobs away from people? What is going on? Well, they're negotiating now about how many beds they can have in a detention center. And is the president going to have to sign that bill? They're going to give him a little bit for the border wall, which he says is essential, and they say no way. It's just incredible what's going on. And the one thing I want to say emphatically to you right now, we cannot shut the government down. It just hurts too many people. It leaves too much uncertainty, and it's too much confusion. And on top of that, we've got to raise the spending limit, or else our credit will go bad and we can't borrow any money. So this standoff has got to stop. But the president is heading today to El Paso del Norte. That was the way to the north, El Paso del Norte. He's going down as a rally support, and with days to go before what could be another government shutdown. Negotiations in Congress, they say, have now stalled. We can't have it, ladies and gentlemen. We're the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and this makes us look like a banana republic. Terry.
Lawmakers were shooting for a Monday deadline, but over the weekend, Democrats threw in a new demand. Amber Strong has the latest on the negotiations.
The president is headed to El Paso, Texas, to gather support for his border wall. And it looks like he's going to need it, as weekend talks between lawmakers ended in a stalemate.
I'll say 50-50, we get a deal.
I think the big problem here is this has become pretty much an ego negotiation.
The latest fight is over the number of detention beds for undocumented immigrants. Democrats want to limit the amount. A cap on ICE detention beds will force the Trump administration to prioritize deportation for criminals and people who pose real security threats, said Democratic Congresswoman Lucille Roybal Allard. Republicans disagree, and some see it as part of a larger strategy to undercut ICE.
You're actually incentivizing more illegal immigration by reducing the bed space, and it undercuts any money you would get for a wall.
Then there's the $5.7 billion the president requested to build the wall. It's looking to be about half. The president took to Twitter with his frustrations, writing, "They are offering very little money for the desperately needed border wall."
You cannot take a shutdown off the table, and you cannot take 5.7 off the table. But if you end up someplace in the middle, yeah, then what you probably see is the president say, yeah, okay, and then I'll go find the money someplace else.
That someplace else? A combination of legal funds and monies taken from other departments. The question is, will he declare a national emergency to do so?
And there's pots of money where all presidents have access to without a national emergency, right. And there's ones that he will not have access to without that declaration.
But a national emergency may not bode well with his GOP colleagues. Meanwhile, the fate of 800,000 federal workers hangs in the balance again.
Seeing another shutdown just a couple days away on the horizon, I think, is scary for anybody.
And in what could be a preview to 2020, President Trump will hold that rally there in El Paso. And at the same time, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke will hold his own rally to show what he calls the realities of the border. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
Well, CBN chief political analyst David Brody is with us. David, there's just no way the president can shut the government down. I mean, it'll be devastating, don't you think?
Oh, I think it's going to be a major PR hit for sure, and devastating, obviously, to folks that would obviously be out of work at that point. I don't think it's going to happen, Pat. I don't think there's going to be another shutdown. I think this White House understands that they can't go through that again. So what does it mean exactly? Well, let's start with this. Some of the sources I'm talking to this morning say we're not quite sure how this is going to play out exactly, though the shutdown doesn't seem to necessarily be an option. It sounds to me like what may happen here, two potential solutions here. I say solutions. One could be a stopgap measure. We've heard this again and again, where they extend this another week or two to continue to hammer out a deal. That could be possible. Or, look, the president does indeed go the national emergency route. But beyond that, beyond the national emergency route, remember, there's some money in there that wouldn't be subject to a legal challenge. There's Section 284 of the U.S. Code that talks about the Defense Department can actually does have authority to build certain fencing in America. So that's what Mick Mulvaney was talking about specifically, to say that, look, there is the national emergency. That'll be the legal challenge. But there are some other avenues where he can actually use some of that money that's already approved by Congress that the president has a jurisdiction to do.
Why do you think the Democrats are objecting to detaining illegal immigrants? What is in their mind?
Well, boy, I tell you what, it is a gamble. I'll tell you that much. I mean, this is a party that has kind of started to go off the rails to the far left, leaving Donald Trump with a huge opening in 2020. Look, I think that they're frustrated that basically this interior enforcement that we hear a lot about. In other words, the fact that the Trump administration has ICE, folks from ICE going around the country rounding up undocumented immigrants from time to time. They want to stop that if they're not violent criminals. Now, the truth of the matter is, if you look at some of the statistics, roughly or so, 80 to 90% of folks that ICE arrests are actually either violent criminals or something along those lines. So it's not just, a group of 6 or 7 undocumented or illegal immigrants around the country that have done nothing wrong. So I think that's kind of the rub. Look, I think ultimately Democrats here have a real problem. I also think that if they're going to give, the Democrats, are going to give any money to Donald Trump for this wall, a fence, a barrier, we've talked about this before, steel slats, that they want to get something in return. And this is how they want to try to, in essence, come back against the Trump administration's policy on immigration.
Well, Trump has offered, as I understand, the legal status for the Dreamers, which I think everybody would like to see. I mean, what's the status of that? Would that not please the Democrats, do you think?
Well, twice now, at least. It's actually been at least twice that President Trump has pretty much offered protection for the Dreamers. The Democrats have turned it down. Look, this has been, Pat, as you know, I mean, with the Democrats, this has been no wall funding, period, end, and that's the bottom line. What's interesting here is it looks like part of this deal actually could give some wall funding. Now, the Democrats will never call it wall funding. They'll call it some additional fencing, but fences, walls, here we go again. It's semantics, steel slats. The bottom line is that there is going to be some new fencing built, most likely, here. Even if it's not under the national emergency, it's going to be done as part of some sort of agreement whenever they come to some sort of agreement, which we don't know at this point.
The Democrats look like they're moving so far to the left. This so-called Green Deal that they've unveiled is just incredible. I mean, that young congresswoman from New York is just off the rails, saying she wants to ban air travel. She wants to ban the use of fossil fuels. I mean, it'll make our electric bills go up probably 6 times what they are now. Who's in charge of that stuff?
Well, I have to tell you, in a real way, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is in charge of that stuff. And because she has the most dynamic Twitter and Facebook feeds and all of that on social media, she is driving the Democrat Party right now, and everybody pretty much is following her lead. Here's the problem. She may be leading them right off a cliff. I mean, look, 2020 comes along, and if they're going to go far, far left, whether it be the Green New Deal, which, as you mentioned, basically wants to have high rail systems in the United States rather than airplanes, because they want to get rid of 100% of fossil fuels and make 100% renewable energy. In essence, we would be dependent on the wind and the sun. Good luck with that. The point is that they're far left. And then you look at the polls. An NBC News poll recently, Pat, just says that 19% of Americans are okay with socialism, which, by the way, is actually kind of high and a bit scary. But still, it's 19%. It is far to the left. It gives Donald Trump a huge opportunity to basically paint them as socialist and go into 2020 saying, look, I want to make America great again. And they want to make America socialist for the first time. And I think that's the contour of the 2020 race that's shaping up.
Well, Trump can always point to Venezuela. Have you got any update on what's going on there? That it looked like Maduro was on the way out, and then he's hardening his stance.
All of the White House sources that I'm talking to keep on saying the same thing as we press them, which is all options are on the table, whether that be military or otherwise. And it's a smart move by the Trump administration. But I think ultimately you can be sure that Donald Trump is going to bring up Venezuela as part of that socialism narrative that he's going to try to push.
Senator Warren, there's an application she made at a school, and she listed herself, her ethnic background was, quote, American Indian. How can she possibly run for president with that nonsense? And now Amy Klobuchar has joined in a snowstorm over the weekend, and it was freezing cold, and she was out there with no coat on. Is there anybody that looks like they're serious contenders, or is he going to go to Joe Biden?
Well, there's so many things to unpack there. First of all, it is kind of interesting. Amy Klobuchar was talking about global warming during the middle of a snowstorm, so that wasn't the best optics for Amy Klobuchar, for sure. As for Elizabeth Warren, look, she has been labeled, and you know what it is, Pat, Pocahontas by President Trump. And what we know in politics is that when the narrative starts to form for you, for better or for worse, that's it. Game, set, match. For President Obama, it worked well. He was the hope and change candidate. For, quote, Lion Ted and Little Marco and all of that, it didn't work out so well. And so Elizabeth Warren has a perception problem right from the beginning. It's going to be very hard for her to overcome. Democrats are telling me privately that there's a long time. We'll see. I think they're obviously pretty optimistic on that. As for Amy Klobuchar, she'll be interesting to watch. There is this report out there, multiple reports now, about how she doesn't treat her staff very well. That may be an understatement, but that narrative is starting to form about her. Look, here's the thing. Amy Klobuchar, when you look at the progressive scale, you've got grade A's when it comes to what the progressives like, from Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker. They're all A's with the progressives. Amy Klobuchar gets a C rating. She's a little bit more moderate. And so we'll see if that is going to work better or worse in 2020. I don't think the C rating is going to play very well the way the Democrat Party is heading.
Well, Trump is licking his chops and rubbing his hands with glee over this field. There aren't any of them capable of opposing him. Again, back to Joe Biden. Joe's a little old, and he has that problem with the Neil Kinnock stuff that went on when he was first being considered. Is he serious? You think he's a real nice guy? I mean, Joe, he's Mr. Average Man, and everybody likes him.
Right. Yeah, he's Mr. Average Man, and he's pretty authentic, even if you disagree with him. So I believe, and I believe I've said it here, Pat, but I got to tell you, I think the only Democrat in America that can probably beat Donald Trump is Joe Biden. Why? Because Democrats lost the white, middle-class, blue-collar vote. Many of those were Democrats. Joe Biden probably has the best chance to get them back. They are more liberal on economic policy, but more social on, more conservative on social issues. And even though Joe Biden isn't necessarily social on conservative issues, he does speak their language a little bit more. He's very rough and tumble. He'll get in the gutter with Trump if he has to. And here's most importantly, we talked about Elizabeth Warren, about branding. Joe Biden, you can't brand the guy. He's already branded. Donald Trump won't be able to do too much with him, whereas he could do a lot with many of the other candidates.
David, thank you very much. You know, I remember when I was in the arena, and Joe Biden and I both went on the same plane, as I recall. We're on the way to New Hampshire. He was going for a Democratic primary. I was going for Republican. I got killed in New Hampshire. He didn't do too badly either. But yeah, he's an interesting guy, but he is a little long in the tooth, and that plagiarism thing will probably hang around him. But he's the only one, and they're talking now about the wife of the former president as a contender. You know, there's a big news story about her today.
Really? Wow.
Isn't it crazy?
It's very crazy.
I don't think the Democrats have anybody. Well, the Democrats have their problems in Virginia, too. That political crisis could get worse. Mark Martin has more of that from our CBN newsroom.
That's right, Pat. A Virginia lawmaker backed off a plan to introduce an impeachment bill today, seeking the removal of the second most powerful officer in the state. Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax is facing allegations of sexual assault. This as the governor and state attorney general are embroiled in their own scandals. Both admitted wearing blackface in the 1980s. But despite calls from state and national Democrats, Governor Ralph Northam says he won't resign.
Virginia needs someone that can heal. There's no better person to do that than a doctor. Virginia also needs someone who is strong, who has empathy, who has courage, and who has a moral compass. And that's why I'm not going anywhere. I have learned from this. I have a lot more to learn.
If the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general all left office, the Speaker of the House, who is a Republican, would then become governor. Pat?
Well, you know, the Democrats are kind of stuck. I mean, if they get rid of a black lieutenant governor, even if he's guilty of sexual assault, and it seems like the witnesses against him were extremely credible, nevertheless, you've got two white guys standing, and it looks, the perception is that they've taken out a black man and left two white Democrats standing, and that's going to be a problem. And the Attorney General is one who, in my opinion, you know, was really deceitful to the electorate. He indicated before he ran that he was going to uphold the laws as Attorney General. First move was that he refused to defend the right to marriage or the Defense of Marriage Act in Virginia or in the nation, and he lied, and so he deserves what he gets. But they've got him on a blackface thing too, which I think is minimal considering the gravity of his deceit. But anyhow, the state, it's disgraceful. Virginia was known as the mother of presidents. This was the ground of great liberty. You've got Patrick Henry, you've got Madison, you've got John Marshall, you've got Thomas Jefferson. You've got these great men from the state of Virginia, and now you've got this ridiculous kabuki theater going on in Richmond. It makes me sick as a Virginian. I mean, I just kind of say, how could it have happened to the state that we love? Mark?
Pat, in other news, Republican Congressman Walter Jones of North Carolina passed away Sunday. His congressional office said Jones was a dedicated Christian who stood up for Americans who needed a voice for the military and their families. He also fought hard to see the Johnson Amendment repealed. That law denies tax-exempt status to any organization, including houses of worship, for endorsing or opposing political candidates. Jones went into hospice after his health declined after breaking a hip last month. He died on his 76th birthday. North Carolina's Democratic Governor Roy Cooper will schedule a special election to fill his seat. Pat?
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's part of the news, but I tell you, all I can say is hang on to your seats and do an awful lot of praying because this country needs it.